Does Pope Leo XIII affirm the recognize and resist thesis? Stick around to find out.
You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussions, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Reason and Theology on a Monday morning. Get ready for a fun one. Does Pope Leo XIII affirm the recognize and resist thesis? The answer is a no, an emphatic no. What is recognize and resist? Well, there's different ways to define it, but one definition would be that one would recognize the current occupant of the throne of St. Peter, but resist his false teachings. That's effectively recognize and resist in a nutshell. We can obviously tease that out, but that's our working definition for the moment. Is this position really a tenable position? Is there a grain of truth to it? According to Donum Veritatis, these are all questions that we can consider, but most of the people who affirm, recognize, and resist would say that the Pope can teach non-definitively heresy in an error that would be destructive if one were to assent to it. And I have put forward the thesis many times. It's not unique to me. It's a repetition of many who have gone before me. Especially in the pre-conciliar era, but also in the post-conciliar era. I've put forward the thesis that when it comes to non-definitive teachings, you could have an error in the magisterium, but it would never be an error that if one were to assent to it, it would be harmful to their souls. And so there's a lot of places that we could go to establish that. And in fact, I'll do a separate stream where I substantiate that. I've already done it concerning universal liturgical promulgation. So anything that the Pope has promulgated universally and liturgically, so disciplines that have been promulgated by the teaching authority of the church or the magisterium in general. I've already put that forward in a separate video. I'll do, however, another video where I go over teachings specifically from primary and secondary sources, whether or not they can contain an error that is harmful to souls. And the answer is no, they can't. Franzen, both of those, Ratzinger, and several others. I'll marshal to the defense of that thesis, as well as primary sources. Okay, let's first, however, go over Pope Leo XIII in this video and ask, does he affirm, recognize, and resist, or does he resist, recognize, and resist? Let me share my screen. And after this, I'm going to address a common comeback that I've seen for this. And it's not a good one, so I'm going to respond to that as well. Okay. This is from Epistola Tua, 1885, Leo XIII to the Archbishop of Paris. I found a English translation of it here. Apostolic letter of His Holiness Pope Leo XIII on the submission that is incumbent on writers as regards to religious affairs and the action of the church in relation to Catholic society. So it's especially in regards to journalists, writers, people who are putting out their views in the public sphere. Guess what? That's all of us today. All of us on social media. We're putting our views out there in the public sphere in a way that is, in some ways, reaches more people than journalists in that day. So everything that applies to them applies to us all the more. Those of us who are Twitter users, Facebook users, YouTube users, whatever. This all applies to us. Let's start right here. Therefore, the recent publication of certain written work from a source that has been less expected, in which you also deplore the stir that arose out of it, and the comments that it caused enjoin me to remain by no means silent on the matter, the consideration of which, even if perhaps it may turn out to be unpleasant, will still, for this reason, not be less useful, both in France and even elsewhere. So the Pope is saying there's some recent events that have come up that are causing me to no longer be silent on this issue, and it may be something that, some people don't want to hear, but it is what it is. By certain indications, it is not difficult to conclude that among Catholics, doubtless as a result of current evils, there are some who, far from satisfied with the current condition of subject, that is, they being a subject to the magisterium, which is theirs in the church, think themselves able to take some part in her government, or at least think that they are allowed to examine and judge after their own fashion the acts of authority. Sound familiar? A person who thinks that they are able to judge the teaching authority of the church by their own authority. He says, a misplaced opinion, certainly. If it were to prevail, it would do very grave harm to the Church of God. Sounds like he's already resisting this recognize and resist theory and sees it as a grave harm to the church. Why is it that I talk about some of the problems among those who maintain, recognize, and resist? Because it does harm to the church. And it would seem that Leo XIII would back up this notion. Let's continue, though. In which, by the manifest will of her divine founder, there are to be distinguished in the most absolute fashion two parties, the teaching and the taught, the shepherd and the flock, among whom there is one who is the head and supreme shepherd of all. Obviously, that's the Pope. To the shepherds alone, that's going to be the bishops, was given all power to teach, to judge, to direct. On the faithful was imposed the duty of following their teaching, of submitting with docility to their judgment, and of allowing themselves to be governed, corrected, and guided by them in the way of salvation. I can already hear it now. So, Michael, are you saying that Pope Leo XIII is saying we must submit to heresy if a Pope teaches heresy? As I've said, the Pope can't teach heresy, even non-definitively. And once again, I will substantiate that in a different stream. But that would be my response, is that is a scenario that has not happened and cannot happen. So I would challenge anybody who says it has happened or that they can take that approach in that instance. Obviously, nobody is bound to assent to heresy. The point, however, is the magisterium can't authoritatively, yes, even non-definitively, teach heresy. That's the point. That's why I maintain that thesis. Well, I especially maintain the thesis because it's there in the primary and secondary sources. Okay, but again, I'll address that in another day. For now, I am just showing here's what Leo XIII has said. Take it or leave it. Thus, it is an absolute necessity for the simple faithful to submit in mind and heart to their own pastors, and for the latter to submit with them to the head and supreme pastor. In this subordination and dependence lie the order and life of the church. In it is to be found the indispensable condition of well-being and good government. I mean, if you have every man for themselves, you would have chaos, right? You wouldn't have good government. On the contrary, if it should happen that those who have no right to do so should attribute authority to themselves, if they presume to become judges and teachers, if inferiors in the government of the universal church attempt or try to exert an influence different from that of the supreme authority, there follows a reversal of the true order. Many minds are thrown into confusion and souls leave the right path. Sound familiar? Yep, that's exactly what's happening today. Many souls are in confusion and they are leaving the right path because they've bought into this idea that the church can teach heresy. As long as it's non-definitive, it could do this. And we have to resist those things. So we recognize that authority that is teaching heresy, but we resist that authority. Well, people have bought into this and they have become confused. And as a result, they often leave the church because they say, it is absurd for me to obey and assent. Well, it's absurd for me to follow a magisterial authority that teaches heresy to me and feeds heresy to me. They say, this isn't a good parent. This is a parent that's feeding me poison. Why am I wasting time with this? And then they leave the church. And to fail in this most holy duty is not necessary to perform an action in open opposition, whether to the bishops or the head of the church. In other words, to fail in this duty, it doesn't just mean that you've only failed in this duty if you openly oppose the church. No, even if it's indirect, you're still failing in your duty, even if you're not openly opposing the church publicly, although that's still very common today. It is enough for this opposition to be operating indirectly, all the more dangerous because it is hidden. It is the more hidden. So even if this dissent is internal, it's even more dangerous than if you were to put it out there publicly. Thus, a soul fails in this sacred duty when, at the same time that a jealous zeal for the power and prerogatives of the sovereign pontiff is displayed, the bishops united to him are not given their due respect. And this is respect due to their office, not because of personal merits. Obviously, there are shepherds who have not personally merited a whole lot of reason for us to give them respect. However, we still give it to them because of the office that they carry resembles Christ insofar as they've been validly ordained and exercise jurisdiction in the church. But a lot of times, we completely ignore this and disrespect them and do violence to the office that they hold. All right. Or sufficient account is not taken of their authority. Or their actions and intentions are interpreted in a captious manner. Oh, that sounds familiar. Their actions and intentions are interpreted in a captious manner. Basically, you're interpreting them as, oh, this is scandalous, right? Go to it. Let me pull it up here. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see here. There we go. Here's just a good English translation. Obviously, you didn't speak in English, but I'm just going with the translation on the English. We could also look at the Latin, but it's effectively going to be the same. Calculated to confuse, entrap, or entangle in an argument. It's in ambiguous language that is intended to confuse people. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? It sounds very familiar to me because there are a whole bunch of people that are saying the Pope is intending to be ambiguous. The Second Vatican Council intended to be ambiguous, and its teachings can be interpreted in this false way, or it can be interpreted in a positive or true way. But their intentions were to be ambiguous and deceptive and misleading. And that's exactly, again, what they're saying of Pope Francis, even recently with the apostolic letter, saying that he intended to be ambiguous in a captious manner. Pope Leo XIII is condemning people who take that approach. That's exactly what I've been talking about recently. People who take that evil suspicion approach. Let me interpret this in the worst possible light rather than in the best light. The ones who say, let me interpret this in the worst possible light are guilty of this. Pope Leo XIII is not on board with it. And watch this. It gets better. Those who are doing this to the bishops or Pope, saying that their actions and intentions are interpreted in a captious manner without waiting for the judgments of the Holy See, the judgment of the Holy See. So judging these bishops, judging them and saying, I am interpreting them in the worst possible way when the Holy See hasn't made a judgment yet. That's interesting. How much more then would it be unreasonable to do this to the Holy See if we're to wait for the judgment of the Holy See in relation to bishops? Similarly, it is to give proof of a submission which is far from sincere to set up some kind of opposition between one pontiff and another. Does that sound familiar? Oh, Pope Francis teaches this contrary to Pope Pius XII. Haven't you seen videos on that not too long ago? Pope Francis teaches this teaching, but it's completely condemned as heresy by Pius XII over here. This is exactly what Leo XIII is condemning. A person who, as a private individual, not a bishop, not a member of the magisterium, would proudly say, oh, well, this pope is teaching contrary to that pope. They're putting one pontiff against another. Those who, faced with two differing directives, reject the present one to hold to the past, are not giving proof of obedience to the authority, which has the right and duty to guide them. Full stop. He's saying there are people out there who will take one pope and put him against another pope. And what they'll do is they'll say, I reject the current pope and what he's teaching because a past pope said this. And so I'm holding to tradition. I'm holding to what the older pope says, and I'm rejecting the current pope. He's condemning that. But isn't that the present error today among many Catholics? Now, obviously, there's all kinds of errors with liberal Catholics. I'm talking about ones who are trying to take tradition seriously. Isn't there a problem here? Where those who are trying to take the Catholic faith seriously often are taking one pope and putting him against another and saying, well, I'm going to go with the older one because that's somehow indicative of tradition. And the new pope, that's somehow indicative of modernism or innovation. So he says, similarly, it is to give proof of submission, which is far from sincere, to set up some kind of opposition. He says that's insincere between one pontiff and another. Those who, faced with two differing directives, reject the present one to hold to the past, are not giving proof of obedience to the authority, which has the right and duty to guide them. They're not giving obedience to the current authority, and they are to do so. And in some ways, they resemble those who, on receiving a condemnation, would wish to appeal to a future council or to a pope who is better informed. Does that sound familiar? Well, I'm going to reject this current pope because this other pope said, something else. And I'm just going to wait for an ecumenical council to solve this issue. Or I'm just going to wait for a future pope way down the line to fix this situation. He's directly condemning that in the 1800s, late 1800s, because this was a problem then as it is now. It's much more common now because people's positions can be put forth in the public sphere a lot easier on social media. But he's condemning that view. On this point, what must be remembered is that in the government of the church, except for the essential duties imposed on all pontiffs by their official apostolic office, each of them can adopt the attitude which he judges best according to the times and circumstances. Of this, he alone is the judge. It is true that for this, he has not only special lights, but still more the knowledge of the needs and conditions of the whole of Christendom, for which it is fitting his apostolic care must provide. He has the charge of the universal welfare of the church, to which is subordinate any particular need. And all others who are subject to this order must second this action of supreme director and serve the end which he has in view. Since the church is one and her head is one, so too her government is one, and all must conform to this. When these principles are forgotten, there is noticed among Catholics a diminution of respect, of veneration, and of confidence in the one given them for a guide. Isn't that true today? How many have lost respect, veneration, and confidence in the current magisterium? There then is a loosening of that bond of love and submission which ought to bind all the faithful to their pastors, the faithful and the pastors to the supreme pontiff, the bond in which principally to be found security and common salvation. I can hear people now, but you're saying I have to assent to err. Again, I've already addressed that, but here's the point. When you come back with that kind of pushback, even though I don't think that that's a legitimate argument, but when you come back with that pushback, do you recognize that you're falling in the crosshairs of Pope Leo XIII? You have to at least say Pope Leo XIII was wrong. Just be willing to say that. And if you're willing to say Pope Leo XIII was wrong, okay. Upon what basis do you then criticize people who say that Dignitatis Humanae reversed Pope Leo XIII on religious liberty, and that Leo XIII was not fully correct on the issue of religious liberty, and Vatican II reversed that? Again, that's not my position, but there are plenty of people who take that position. Upon what basis do you say they're wrong? If Leo XIII was wrong here, could he have not have been wrong on that issue too? Upon what basis do you say, well, I accept Pope Pius the 12th on this issue, but I reject Pope Francis on this issue? How come you can't just say, well, you know what? Maybe Pope Pius the 12th was also wrong. If Pope Leo the 13th was wrong here, maybe Pope Pius the 12th was wrong. Upon what basis are you going to say one is right and what is wrong? The only way you could really make that determination is by actually looking at what the magisterium itself says about weighing magisterial propositions, which is exactly what I'm trying to do with reason and theology, and go over this with individuals. Okay, that obligation, if it is generally incumbent on all, is, you may indeed say, especially pressing upon journalists. So when you see that, think of yourself at this point, right, as a social media user. That's you and I. We're not journalists per se, but we're disseminating our views in the public sphere way more than these journalists were able to reach back then. I mean, our tweet can reach thousands and thousands of people, right? Just one tweet. So think yourself here. If they have not been imbued with the docile and submissive spirit so necessary to each Catholic, they would assist in spreading more widely those deplorable matters and making them more burdensome. Yeah. If you're not right in your disposition as a media user, you're going to disseminate that error all over social media. The task pertaining to them in all things that concern religion and that are closely connected to the action of the church and human society is this: to be subjective completely in mind and will, just as all the other faithful are, to their own bishops and to the Roman pontiff, to follow and make known their teachings, to be fully and willingly subservient to their influence, and to reverence their precepts and assure that they are respected. He who would act otherwise in such a way that he would serve the aims and interests of those whose spirit and intentions we have reproved in this letter would fail the noble mission he has undertaken. So doing in vain would he boast of attending to the good of the church. You know, he's saying, oh, I'm doing a good service to the church by pointing this out. No, it's in vain. And helping her cause, no, it's not helping her cause. No less than someone who would strive to weaken or diminish the Catholic truth. They're the same as those who would try to weaken or diminish the Catholic truth. Or indeed someone who would show himself to be her overly fearful friend. Your innermost thoughts, which we well known in the discreet way in which you have valiantly conducted yourself in these difficult times, has moved us to discuss these matters with you, beloved son. And so he goes on, and that's pretty much the end of the apostolic letter here. And of course, you can see it's in the Acta Sancta Sedis, which is the former version of the AAS. So there you go. Does he accept, recognize, and resist? No, he completely rejects recognize and resist. How does that work with the non-definitive magisterium and things like that? Again, that's where my thesis comes into play. The thesis that there would not be anything in them that is destructive or harmful to souls. And again, it's not unique to me, but it is something that we find in the magisterium itself and in plenty theologians and secondary sources. Like I said, I'll do a separate video substantiating that in relation to non-definitive teachings. I've already done a video on that in relation to the disciplines of the church. And if those pertain to the universal disciplines of the church, how much more do they pertain to teachings? Obviously, they're going to apply that much more. But one other thing that I wanted to show, in response to this, I've seen a lot of people quote something from Pius IX, but they actually don't really give you the source. And this is the problem. Be aware of people online who will quote something, but not actually give you the citation. It's so common. I see it nonstop. I see it especially with a lot of rad trads on communion and the hand quotes. They'll say the Fifth Ecumenical Council said this, and it actually wasn't the Fifth Ecumenical Council, and it's actually the exact opposite of what they were intending to quote. They were intending to quote the Sixth Ecumenical Council at Trullo, and it actually says the exact opposite. It's just like people, what they do is they just copy and paste stuff, and don't even have the proper citations, and they just butcher it. And throughout a series of people who are copying and pasting this stuff, it gets further and further removed from the truth. So pay attention to those who post quotes but don't actually give you a citation. Pay attention to that. You'll see a quote all the time. Put this in Google right now. If a future pope teaches something contrary to the Catholic faith, don't follow him. Pope Pius IX. Let's type it in Google. See what all comes up here. All right, here we go. If a future pope teaches something contrary to Catholic faith, it's coming up here. It's coming up here. I'm seeing it coming up here. I'm seeing it coming up here on Gloria TV. Seeing it here on Twitter. I'm seeing it. There's a ton of these. A ton of them. Just Google it and look through all the hits. If a future pope teaches something contrary to the Catholic faith, don't follow him. End quote, Pope Pius IX. No actual source really given. What you will sometimes see is letter to Bishop Brizan. There is no Bishop Brizan. There's never been a bishop named Brizan. There is the Bishop of Brixen. So obviously somebody on the internet copied this stuff and it ended up getting mixed up. And so they say it's Bishop Brizan in these quotes, but I think they meant the Bishop of Brixen, which at the time was Bishop Gasser at the first Vatican Council. And I have not been able to find anywhere where Pope Pius IX said this. Can't find it. If it exists, I have seen nobody substantiate that. Nobody has been able to produce that. But it's circling online. This is just one of millions of examples, but it's circling online as if it's gospel truth. Where is the original to this? Well, let's check this out. Father Hess wants to tell us where to find it. All right. Let me know if you can't hear the audio. You share my screen. Father Hess I've found to be an incredibly unreliable source. I've long ago dismissed him because I realized when it comes to the claims that he would make, he would vaguely reference something, and I was able to find where he got it from, and then I looked at the original and saw it was something else and did not support his position. And at that point I realized, okay, this guy isn't, I'm not going to take this guy seriously. But here's another example of why I don't think you should take Father Hess seriously. He's going to allegedly tell us where Pope Pius IX says this. Watch this.
Pope Pius IX, servant of God, Pius IX, in a letter to the Bishop of Brixen in northern Italy, once upon a time in Austria. In those days, he was part of Austria. In this letter, which you can find under number 5,500 something, forgot the rest, in the famous...
Did you hear it? I forgot the rest. So he's not even going to give you a full citation here. But keep listening.
Find under number 5,500 something, forgot...
Manzi, 5,500 something, that is not how Manzi is actually cited. I've never seen anyone cite Manzi this way, which is, of course, a collection of councils. Now, you might have various letters that are related to, some kind of council. So maybe letters of a pope that are maybe related to perhaps Vatican I. But this is not how you cite Manzi at all. There's no such thing as Manzi 5.5s. I forgot the rest. What?
The time in Austria. In those days, he was part of Austria. In this letter, which you can find under number 5,500 something, forgot the rest, in the famous collection of papal letters and documents, Manzi, M-A-N-S-I.
And again, Manzi is not a collection of papal letters primarily. Again, it's a collection more of councils and documents related to the council.
Mike Alpha November Sierra India. That's how you spell it.
M-A-N-S-I, right.
In that collection, number 5,500 something, you find a letter written by Pope Pius IX that explains to the Bishop of Brixen, if a future pope was to pronounce heresy, You simply disregard it and don't obey.
There you go. That's where this probably came from. It probably all came from Hess. And Hess doesn't actually tell us where this is in Manzi. It's 5-5 something. Okay, good luck finding that, since that doesn't actually mean anything.
So far, Pope Pius IX on the topic. Now,
Okay, all right. So I actually like that this guy in the comment section realized the problems with it. This guy Tim Wilson realized the problems. Kudos to him, and he gives a long comment here explaining the problems with his reference to Manzi, and it says a lot of the same things that I said, but he said he's looked through gas, or he's looked through the table of contents, he's looked through the index, he's looked through everything, tried to find anything that would be in accord with, this quote, and could not find anything. The time that the Bishop of Brixton comes up, it's like he could not find anything like this, right? So this was, I think he summarizes it really well at the end. Either his memory was bad, or he was inventing it out of thin air. I agree. But you will see this stuff quoted all the time as if it is gospel truth. And they'll quote it just like this: if a future pope teaches heresy, do not follow him, Pope Pius IX. And they'll sometimes use that in response to this actual, verifiable apostolic letter from Pope Leo XIII. They'll use this bogus quote that nobody has actually been able to substantiate. If it's there, I've not seen anybody actually able to substantiate it. So produce the actual primary source. Show me where it's at, and then we'll talk further about it. But until then, I can't go with a bogus quote, seemingly bogus quote, to respond to something that I can really verify and substantiate, and that is Leo XIII's epistle, which I just read to you. So take that as a lesson, to pay attention to people whenever they give you these quotes from popes. Pope Innocent III said this, and so said that, and they usually aren't really fully cited. Pay attention to that. In some cases, they're authentic. In many cases, they're not. Okay. I think there was a super chat. Let me grab that real quick. Let's see. Father John says, when Pope Francis was first elected, he spoke about the faithful needing to be discerning. He wants us not to be computers in need of ever more detailed programming. It's not a crazy idea, right? Here we go. Let's see. Thank you for the super chat. Roca Souls says, it seems like people have a tendency to treat the Pope and the bishops the same way they would treat an elected official like the president or a congressman. Thank you for all you do. I appreciate it. Yeah, and I agree. And again, like I said, what people are going to do is they're going to say, but how does what Leo XIII said work with this and this and that and that and that? And we can go through that, and I can give answers to that. But the point is this. Notice when you start asking those questions, notice that you're already distrusting Pope Leo XIII here. And isn't that the exact same thing? Aren't you a living example at that point of what he's condemning? Whenever you start doing this to Leo XIII, isn't that what he's condemning here? That you start doing this with one Pope saying, how does that work with this? And I don't know if I can agree with what the Pope is doing. You're a living example at that point of what he's condemning. Just keep that in mind. And again, upon what basis are you really going to then say, well, so-and-so is wrong to reject this teaching of the Pope, and this or that priest on Twitter is wrong to reject this or that encyclical of the Pope? Upon what basis are you going to say, I'm right to reject Leo XIII, but you're wrong to do, to reject Pope Pius XII in this encyclical? Upon what basis? What is it? What is his comment? Pope Alexander III said, quote, Pope Benedict XVI is the true Pope, my dudes, end quote. This is undeniable proof, right? This is on the level of the kind of stuff that I see that is provided in response to actual authentic magisterial documents. People will give you this bogus quote that hasn't been substantiated. I'll show primary sources about communion in the hand in the first millennium, and somebody will give me a bogus quote, completely, butchering what was actually said at a council, and the council actually said the exact opposite of what they're saying. It happens all the time. So you have to be discerning, make sure to ask people for their sources and go and verify the sources, because you'll see, I don't know, the majority of the time they're not accurate, or they're misinterpreting something. In some cases they're accurate, but in a lot of cases they're not. So be discerning, and always remember, Pope Leo XIII condemns, recognize, and resist. I hope y'all enjoy this. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Of course, also check me out at patreon.com/reason and theology to get access to extra content if you want to support me and what I'm doing here. All right, we'll see you later. God bless.
Oh wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video. If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/reason and theology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless.